Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be interviewing Monica Ball, who is running for the state representative seat of District 39. I was 80% sure on that. And we're going to be talking to her about her policies that she wants to bring to the wonderful city of Maumelle. With me is my wonderful cousin, William. Say hi, William.
Hi, William.
Nice. Nice. And we'd like to introduce Miss Monica Ball.
Hi, thank you for being here.
All those were my
Thank
hands.
you for having me.
So I wanted to, I just wanted to talk about how we actually came to be here right now. You were doing the Lord's work, walking door to door, which I appreciate because saying Mark Lowry didn't come to my door, but they, you were passing out flyers and all sorts of things. You gave me a voter registration form, which is pretty awesome. And I asked you, would you like to be interviewed for a podcast to, because it might be fun and you could have a little extra publicity because people are chomping at the bit to listen to this.
It's an unnamed podcast.
Yes, but thank you for being here. And why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself? I know, I've been doing the Google machine. I know a lot about you. He knows a lot about you. Would you like to tell everyone your history and how you got into politics and maybe what you did before you were into politics?
All righty. Well, I go back a long way, but I'm not going to go all the way back to where I started. I will just say that I am a retired high school science teacher. I taught for 28 years in North Little Rock and Little Rock Public Schools. So I am a product of public schools. My children went to public schools. My grandson is going to public schools, or a public school. He doesn't go to more than one. And so that's a passion of mine. And, I think most people in previous generations grew up with their lives, family lives, community lives centered around activities that took place in public schools. Mm-hmm. And so I think that they're very important in preparing children for a productive future so that they can be an informed electorate and productive citizens and have the opportunities that I've had to basically coming from a background of poverty to rise above that, and I just think that we're in kind of treacherous times where all of that's being undermined. Mm-hmm. And so that was really what got me into the political scene. I'd been paying attention to what the person who currently sits in this seat that I'm running for, which is House of Representatives District 39. And by the way, it includes almost all of Maumelle. It does not include Diamond Point or North Point. And
Really? I didn't know that.
It includes Marche, Oak Grove, around the Morgan Maumelle exit, Amboy, and part of Levy in North Little Rock, and then the part of North Little Rock that butts up against Maumelle over along Counts Massey Boulevard. Boulevard, Avenue, Road, whatever it is, Counts Massey.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was really what got me concerned and interested because my opponent literally undermines public education with every vote that he casts as he sits on the House Education Committee. Mm-hmm. And I thought I can do something about that. So because I want all children in Arkansas to have access to an excellent public education. I think that that's one of the most important investments that we can make is in our kids and our communities to ensure that we promote an economy that promotes family stability in this state.
Very interesting. Out of curiosity for anyone listening, which high school did you end up teaching at?
I taught 18 years in North Little Rock, all of it at one school. It was Old Main when I started, and it was North Little Rock High School when I finished.
Yeah. One of my friends went there growing up, so maybe you taught one of them.
I probably did. I've taught thousands of students. And then I taught 10 years in Little Rock, excuse me, and 8 of those were at Parkview Arts and Science Magnet. I was in the Science Magnet area, so I ended up teaching biology, AP Environmental Science, Geology and Space, Anatomy and Physiology.
Wow, a Renaissance woman.
I am.
Pretty
I'm
well-rounded,
just
yeah.
about everything except chemistry and physics.
I hate chemistry.
Yeah, she coached the football team and the lacrosse team as well.
No, I don't know about that. Yeah.
Will, do you want to get us started with some get into the nitty gritty?
Sure. Well, before we move on to even policy issues, I thought we would touch a little bit on the political career so far. So, the primary in May, you won by a healthy 67% of the vote against I can't remember his name, but
Joshua Price.
Joshua Price.
Oh yeah, I heard about him.
Yeah, he seems like a very nice guy.
Sure. Thank you for listening, Joshua.
Was that one of your first forays into the public life?
That was absolutely my first.
Okay. Yeah. So, I guess in what ways did that first campaign prepare you for the bigger one right now against Mr. Lowry?
Well, it helped me hone in on the issues. It prompted me to get out and start meeting voters sooner than I might have otherwise. And that's been the best thing that could have happened. Because I knocked thousands of doors and met thousands of people, and I got to get out into the community where the voters actually live and have a better understanding of who they are and what they need.
Sure, absolutely. I think a lot of politicians, get really comfortable keeping their constituents at a distance, and I think some of them actually thrive that way. On the left and the right, you were one of the first people that ever knocked on my door and actually handed me something in paper. And at the time, I didn't know very much about your policy positions at all. I think that that's a good thing. It's always good to go door to door and actually put faces to the names of the people that you're going to be representing.
Sometimes I just feel like in politics, we're losing that human connection, and I'm just a real connective person. That's like I spent my life being connected to other human beings, in a classroom and getting to know them and know individual needs and that sort of thing. And so that's just part of who I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the teaching, I know you have a philosophy of teaching. I was an ed major for a little bit until I decided to change course. Thank you. So would you say you have a similar philosophy for your political philosophy? Is there anything like guiding principles that you think are important as a public officer?
Well, I believe that integrity and, I believe that we as a representative, that I have a duty to represent the people who elect me, not special interests, not big money donors, of which I have none.
I've never met a politician that said they exist to support big money interests and not their constituents.
But even though they don't say that, they end up, basically catering to big money politics.
Sure.
I grew up in a home where my dad was a staunch Democrat, a union man, a working man, blue collar, worked in the aircraft industry in Wichita, Kansas. And so I just grew up with a completely different set of values than most people. And, I won't say most people. Actually, at the time, that was most people.
Sure.
And it seems that the middle class is shrinking instead of growing because of the current policies. And, the disadvantaged are becoming more and more disadvantaged, and the wealthy just keep getting wealthier, and things are just completely out of balance. And I think some balance needs to be restored. And in order to do that, I think we need some ordinary people. I don't consider myself extraordinary by any means, but I'm truly representative of the vast majority of people, because I am one of the vast majority of people. I know what people want and need, and they need to be heard and represented.
I could not agree more.
I also agree with that, and it's nice to see it because the
But
passion,
then again,
the passion
we
really
never
comes
hear
through.
someone said, "I don't think they need to be represented more." I think they're fine as they are. Maybe Ted Cruz would disagree with that. That's fine.
Well, I think it's especially important because in local politics, it's really important not to be a politico. You sort of really do need to be a representative, and it's nice to hear that.
Yeah, it's politics at its most ground level, grassroots. In a way, it's the most
Right.
important level.
Right.
So,
And I think that bleeds really well into the next thing, which is there are of course these really big national issues that everyone likes to sort of talk about, but you're not running for a national position. We're
Thank you
running,
for recognizing that.
right. We're running for District 39
Right.
As a Democrat,
Yeah.
and I wanted to get in about your policy goals for the district because that's what you're running for. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Well, I'm just going to touch on the three major things that I'm running for. And of course, I've already talked a little bit about the education piece. I want to properly fund schools so that teachers are paid to be the professionals that they are trained to be. And we need trained teachers at the front of every classroom. Because that's not currently happening. We're having a teacher shortage. And a large part of that is due to the fact that they aren't treated as professionals and they aren't paid accordingly, and especially according to their level of education. And we need pre-K for every child in the state. We need it available free of charge for every child in the state. I think that's one of the first things we can do to try to start helping people rise above poverty. Arkansas has one of the highest poverty rates in the country. And children are the ones that suffer most from that. And so just to get them on the right footing, we need to start them off with pre-K. Then they can go on into excellent public schools. And then when they graduate from high school, have some sort of training for them, whether they decide to go on to college or whether they decide to do some sort of trade or other type of job that doesn't require college, that we have opportunities available and training for those things. So I think if we do that, that's going to help Arkansas's economy in the long run. Another thing that's important is access to affordable health care. That's a national issue that caught my attention last year, and I was just appalled that, at the national level, Congress was trying to take away health care for millions of people. And that's happening also.
They weren't. Not sorry to interject. They weren't trying.
They did
repealed
it.
the individual mandate.
They did, and so they have virtually neutered it. If nothing else, maybe I should just say neutralized.
No.
The point is
Castrated. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, and so that's a big concern because I'm in that age range, which we will not speak of, where I'm too young for Medicare, and as a retired person,
Monica Ball is 27 years old. For everyone else who knows.
So, yes, that's right. Perpetually 27. But my insurance premiums went up to $711 at the beginning of this year, a month, and I'm blessed, fortunate, whatever you want to call it, that I could afford that, but not for very long, and I would have to afford that up until I am eligible for Medicare, and not to mention prescription costs that people have to deal with. I've had numerous constituents say that they're having to decide between whether to pay their insurance premium or their drug costs, or whether to pay their drug costs or for their groceries because they can't afford it all. And it's just gotten way out of hand.
Not to
And
mention the people that don't even get insurance
Exactly.
because they can't afford it.
Exactly. And that's just going to happen more and more. You know, I mean, I seriously thought about not taking insurance and paying the penalty or whatever. You know, I mean, I was asking, what's the penalty going to be? Because, you know, $711 a month. You know, I'll take my chances on getting sick, you know, but that's a big chance for people to take. I don't recommend it. But, you know, if you don't have an extra $711 a month laying around, you may not have any choice. And a lot of people are in that situation. And that's only for me, you know, so people that have families and have more than that to consider.
As two millennials, me and Will don't have health insurance at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. You know, I mean,
Well, I have health insurance until next year.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Kicked off my parents' insurance.
yes, there you
So,
go.
Thank God they didn't get rid of that part.
You know,
Yes.
that right there is a good reason for all millennials to get out and vote.
Yeah.
You know, because let me tell you, when you have to start paying an insurance premium, oh my gosh, you're going to wish that you had voted for Democrats. Well, anyway, I digress. Then the third thing that concerns me is I think that we need to bring in good jobs for Arkansas. And when I say good jobs, I mean jobs that pay well, that pay benefits, provide a living wage so that families can live and support themselves in dignity. You know, so often we hear boasting about, well, this plant came in and they're, you know, employing so many people, blah, blah, blah. And usually at fairly low wages, you know. Well, that's nothing to brag about. Let's recruit companies that want to come in and provide good jobs. But you're not going to be able to do that unless you have an educated electorate that they'll want to hire. So I still think, you know, that the education piece comes back in front and center. If you want to attract good businesses, good industry to Arkansas, we have got to provide and train the kind of workers that they desire.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more.
So I did want to talk about education a little bit because I've noticed that's a big passion thing for your policy initiatives, and we kind of have this strange situation with a governor who tends to share a lot of that. And in some ways, there's the teacher pay raise that he endorsed, and then there's also that there's Our Future goals and grants, and another thing is that he sort of wants to make Arkansas a coding hub, like a technology hub. I wanted to get a few opinions from you about the governor's education initiatives, because that's something I know what the headlines say. I don't really know the nitty gritty about it. I've done some reading about it, but I just want to hear how your ideals for education policy kind of align with his.
Okay, well, first of all, talking about the teacher pay raise.
Right.
Okay, I believe that he did not mention nary a word about a teacher pay raise until his Democratic opponent came out with his plan to make Arkansas the best place to teach in the next 10 years. And part of that is by raising teacher salaries over the next 10 years to where they are very, very competitive. And as a response to that, or I believe it was as a response to that the governor came out with, something stating that I believe he wants to bring the minimum salary up to $36,000 across the state. And that might sound good to most people.
Sounds low to me still.
But yeah, when you look at what other states around the country are paying, that's still not all that high. But what it also doesn't take into consideration is when they talk about raising the starting teacher salary, a lot of times that raise that would be comparable to that does not make its way up the salary scale to teachers who have been teaching for years. And then what ends up happening is the newbies end up starting off making almost as much as the ones that have been around for a long time. You know, and so they and they'll say, oh, well, we don't have enough money to pay everybody, so let's just, well, what's the enticement of starting off at a salary that you're going to be stuck at for, the next 2 decades or whatever? I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating there, but not by much. Okay. So they need to be checking with teachers and AEA, the teachers union, who is expert at coming up with salary schedules that are fair to everybody on them and not just to new hires. And second of all, what was the next part of that?
I also talked about the Our Future grants, and then the East.
Are those the ones that are coming in several millions of dollars for charter schools?
I don't know, because I'm pretty sure he's not a fan of voucher programs for private schools, but I don't know about charter schools.
Well, he's not doing anything to discourage charter schools. I guarantee you that. And I'm going to talk for a moment about charter schools, just kind of as an education piece for people out there that don't understand why people like me have a problem with them. Okay, basically, when charter schools began, the purpose of them was to provide kind of an alternative setting, an experimental type setting, if you will, where people could try different things. They were aimed at really meeting the needs of underserved students and coming up with innovative methods and that sort of thing. And if they worked well, then, we could transfer some of those methods to the public schools. They were never meant to be a parallel track to public schools, but that's what they're becoming in this state. And especially in the Little Rock area. And I'm just going to put it out there, and, I'm probably going to inflame some people, but, you need to be inflamed if you're not getting this. What we are ending up doing is resegregating our schools. Little Rock and the Little Rock area, we've been under court order for years to desegregate. And as soon as, the Little Rock School District and North Little Rock School Districts were released from court supervision, then that's kind of when charter schools started to explode. Sure. When a student is taken out of a public school and placed in a charter school, the per pupil funding follows that student from their public school to the charter school. Okay, so public school funds are being used to pay for private schools, okay? All right, so basically what we've ended up doing is just think of it as like a pie, okay? It's a certain size pie. That's the pot of funds in the education fund based on per pupil expenditure. That's how schools are funded. Mm-hmm. Well, so people kind of have the notion that a charter school is like the next best thing to a private school, and they don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel there, because you mentioned that private schools or charter schools are a way of resegregating our schools, and private schools were initially created, surreptitiously, to get white people out of ethnic neighborhoods.
Exactly.
So there definitely is a lot of overlap there. I'd like to just ask one little follow up. Do you have the big thing I'm hearing is you have a problem with public funds going to charter schools. Do you have a problem with charter schools fundamentally, or do you, if let's say a parent wants to send their kid to a charter school, but they want, they want to do it in such a way that, no public tax dollars are going to this.
That'd be great. If no public tax dollars were going to it, that'd be great.
Okay, so you're not fundamentally opposed to charter schools.
No,
you're just opposed to the way they are now.
Right. They have morphed into something that they were never intended to be. Mm-hmm. And what they have morphed into, it is basically like draining funds away from public education. And here's my problem with that. Most people have blinders on and they don't want to see that they're depriving some poor children in the Delta part of the state where they don't have adequate facilities. They can't recruit and hire qualified teachers. I mean, they're dirt poor, okay? And their needs are not being met. For every dollar that is taken away from public education, it just ensures that that's going to continue. Now, another thing with charter schools is that they get waivers. They do not have to follow the same rules and regulations and be transparent with how they spend the money, the public funds that they receive, that public schools have to. Okay, so one of the first things I would do is I would change that. You know, if you're going to get public dollars, then you're going to have to account for them.
I think if you're going to get private dollars, they should also be transparent.
Exactly. And here's another thing that I've heard quite a bit from public school teachers just in this past week, because it's really been an issue this past couple of weeks. So the funding for schools is determined by the enrollment on October the 1st.
Yes.
Okay, so everybody wants to get their enrollment up for October 1st because that's going to set the funds, the amount of money that they will receive for the next year.
There's some really sad stories about that too.
Yes, and so what ends up happening is some children are taken, you know, and this is by parents that I don't fault parents for wanting to do what they feel is absolutely best for their children. I think, though, that they are sold a bill of goods a lot of times by charter schools. And I have heard from more than one parent that after that October 1st date passes, their child is encouraged to go back to their public school.
Sure.
But the money does not go back with them. So now, after October 1st, we have a flood of kids coming back into public schools from charter schools, but the money stays with the charter school. So now that public school has to do more with less. That is fundamentally wrong, and that needs to change.
And you see public schools doing all sorts of things to try to make up the gap. I read there's a news story the other day about it was a school in I don't know if it was in like Detroit or something, but they on October, like, you know, before, like, you know, late September, they would have a big giant pizza party to get all the kids in the neighborhood to come out and make sure you re-enroll, even to the point where they were like, you know, we don't even care if you go to school, if you're like, you know, if you're a poor ghetto kid and you decide, like, and your parents don't want to send you to school for whatever reason, which I think is, you know, it's not a good idea, but they would do that so they can get as much funding as possible for the school year, and then they still had to switch to a 4-day school week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's also worth mentioning that these charter schools are getting funding, but the standards for the teachers they're not even comparable to public schools.
No, incredibly lax.
Exactly. That's why I say we need a well-trained teacher at the front of every classroom, regardless of whether it's a charter or a public school, because to do otherwise is to shortchange the students in that classroom. And, you know, one of the ways that we do that the state regulates that, is through teacher certification. And so I know that not everybody fully understands what teacher certification means. Let me just kind of tell you my experience. You know, when I started teaching, I had to go back and take 56 hours in college credit to get certified to teach science. And I also had to take education courses that, you know, teach methodology and classroom management and things like that, and do a semester of student teaching so that you get some hands-on practice before they turn you loose in the classroom. And at the time, I squawked. I was 29 when I started teaching, and I needed to hurry up and get on the clock, you know, so that I could get paid. And I resented that I had to do this semester of student teaching when I couldn't work another job and I couldn't get paid. it was the best thing that ever happened for every student that I ever had, because that's when I learned so much from seasoned teachers that on my first day of school, I knew what I was doing. I was prepared. That is not the case for teachers that frequently are hired to fill the just to fill the classroom, basically. We have alternative certification programs where people that have a degree can go through the process of obtaining alternative certification. And I'm not going to disparage anybody that does that. I know some wonderful teachers that went through that program. But you also hear of, many 40% of teachers leave the classroom in the first 5 years. And a lot of that is because they are not properly prepared for it. They just, and to assume that they're magically going to be supported and their needs are going to be met once they are hired is, it's kind of a pipe dream. That doesn't happen. Real life kicks in. And the kids in that classroom are the ones that suffer. I've heard countless stories of, children being cheated out of proper education in kindergarten. And then the next year, something happens that they end up in a classroom with a teacher. A lot of times they place subs in those rooms because they don't have, we can't staff everything. So there will be people in there that are really not qualified to be there. And, then by the time they get to third grade, they are so far behind on the skills that they need to be proficient readers that, it's just killing them. It's just killing them. And so I don't mean that literally. I mean,
One would hope
But it
not.
puts them at enormous disadvantage.
enormous disadvantage. And those things can easily be fixed, but we've got to, first of all, you've got to make the teaching profession desirable so that people that love children and are gifted at teaching them will want to go into it, and then let's do things to encourage that. I would like to see some stuff where we waive their student loan payments or whatever. And I know people that have gone through programs like this. My stepdaughter, she had a math degree. She went through an alternative teacher program. Excellent teacher. But if she taught for 5 years in a high needs school, then they would pay her student loan debt. And that's the kind of, I don't know what happened to that program. That's been 15 years ago.
I'm going to venture a guess. Funding was slashed.
I would be willing to bet the same thing.
Yeah, and you raise an interesting point about, you said a lot of these younger classes and stuff, they have to put subs in because they don't have adequate staff. And I think it's perfectly fair to say, as a liberal or progressive, that we need to fund these things better, and that money isn't everything, but if you allocate resources towards something, people will be prepared to deal with whatever the problems are.
Right.
And I remember being in high school, and we went to I went to one of the poorest high schools I went to Oak Grove High, which is one of the poorest high schools in the state. Now it's Maumelle High, which is it looks like a electric shaver. It's super sleek. And I remember going there, and they were having budget cuts. I remember there was a bus driver strike one year, and I remember classes. When you disincentivize teachers by giving them a very poor starting salary, you have to understand that people are, those teachers are not going to flock to those jobs. And because of that, the schools will have less resources, but the amount of students that need to go to school is going to stay the same. Mm-hmm. So they're going to try to equal that out in ways that, I don't blame them for as schools, but they have to, is they'll put more students in classrooms with less teachers. Mm-hmm. And that's not a recipe for what I remember, being in a history class that had well over 50 students.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a lot. and not everyone is
I
going to
can't
get
even
the right
remember.
attention.
I can't even remember where that wasn't a violation of standards.
Sure.
You needed me. That's what you needed. You needed me and that classroom teacher association fighting them.
Yeah, and I think that's it's different when you go into college and you have like a big 100-student classroom.
Exactly.
The environment's different, and they're much more prepared, and colleges are much better funded overall than public schools probably
And
are.
college is the student's responsibility, not
Exactly.
the
You
teachers.
choose
It's
to
the other
go
way
there.
around in high school.
Right.
And it's I just think that's a point that needs to be made, is that it's not, if you're a conservative listening to this and you think like just throw more money at the problem, that's not necessarily the entirety of the issue. You talked about a program where if you teach special needs children for over 5 years, you can get public assistance, and I think that's a great idea, and it incentivizes being a teacher, and it can help you out on a personal level as well.
Well, and
Yep.
I think it's not just teaching, but Arkansas doesn't incentivize many of their professionals, and you have a huge number of people who leave the state after they get their degree. We have a really terrible retention rate for college graduates here.
Exactly.
Um,
And part of, again, coming back to that, I think that now we're creating an environment where in some parts of the state, people would rather leave the state than stay because they don't want to put their kids in the schools that are available,
yeah.
And so again, doing something to make sure that our public schools are excellent. And that comes back to the funding thing, like, why aren't we putting the funding into making the public schools the absolute best they can be? And then no one would feel like they needed to take their child and put them in another setting, such as a charter school, because, you're just splitting the money. You're creating a parallel school, and that costs twice as much. I mean, it's insane to me. But and a lot of that is driven by special interests within our own state and special interests pouring money into our state, and that's why you see so much of the I call them poor decisions, the votes that are made that really end up undermining public education. It's because we have some legislators who I will not name that basically, they're bought and paid for by organizations that, they're promoting everything but public education.
Yes.
The
Reactionary.
Betsy DeVos model.
Yes.
I think we've spent enough on education.
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
was
time
about to say.
move on.
Okay, so we've got a couple of other topics we can talk about. Again, education isn't just an Arkansas issue.
course not.
There's a lot of stuff in the South.
Horace Mann called education the great equalizer, and
It is.
It is.
I mean-
It's the
It
closest
is.
thing you'll ever get to that.
If you-
And I'm an example of that. That's why it's my deal.
Yeah, and education is like it's the solution to poverty. You can look at global data for a big example or local data if you want to. But let's go back to the local level just a little bit
All right.
and talk about Maumelle. Maumelle proper, as District 39 would define it, where you'd be representing. So I listened to a few interviews with you, and you talked about sort of the city planning of Maumelle. I think this came up a lot in the primary with your opponent, is about the green space in Maumelle, and what kind of city planning ideas would you have for Maumelle? Any development, or how would you allocate resources to city planning?
She's going to build a moat around all of Maumelle to keep the people from Mayflower out.
Well, actually, I was thinking about building another bridge across the river.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
If I could just, do anything I wanted, to relieve the traffic problems in Maumelle. But honestly, I don't really know what I would be able to do as a state legislature. I was asked about those things.
Yeah, that's a governor thing.
Yeah,
probably. I think.
I was asked about those things during interviews, and I don't want to be critical of interviewers, since you are one, but
I guess.
but but a lot of times they ask about things that really
You don't
they
have
they
any
were
control
not
over.
they were not a major issue for me, like the green spaces. We have them in Maumelle.
Okay,
I love them. I think it was a wonderful idea. I think we should preserve and protect them, and that's how I feel about the green spaces.
Sure. Well, if let's just go ahead and scrap that little bit. We can move on. We can move on to something I think that's pretty pertinent for this.
So we're not
election.
getting a moat to keep the vagrants from Mayflower out.
No,
Not yet.
Damn.
no moat, no wall.
No wall.
Very
Okay.
good. Very good.
So I think this is on my mind a lot. The ballot initiatives for this year for this election. Also wanted to remind anybody that's listening, early voting starts October 22nd.
October 22nd, yes.
And you have 2 weeks to vote before the election concludes. So just remember that.
Yes.
But I thought we might as well get into some of these. We're going to go a little out of order just because of some recent developments. Yesterday, the Supreme Court of Arkansas decided that they're going to uphold the voter ID for the November elections this year.
Right.
And that's also the subject of issue number 2, which is, it's just black and white division on the party line, as far as I could see. And for those who aren't aware of what issue 2 is about, issue 2 is it would require valid photo ID to vote in the elections for Arkansas. And I'm pretty sure there's some language in that bill that kind of keeps it in perpetuity. So it's
Yes, because it actually makes it a part of the Constitution. So let me talk
Oh,
about.
wow. I did not know that.
yeah,
Yes.
it's the real deal.
So when you look at it from that perspective, okay, so the Supreme Court of Arkansas upheld the voter ID law, which I believe is wholly unnecessary. We have not had a great deal. We haven't had hardly any voter fraud, and that was what the purported purpose was, that this is to deal with voter fraud. This was coming down from the national level, from the likes of people like is it Kurt Kobach from Kansas?
I think it's Chris Kobach.
Chris Kobach. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm getting him confused with Kurt Cobain. But anyway, which is it's a completely different thing.
The bass player of
Kurt,
the bass
Kurt
player of Nirvana. We're in a music studio for those of you who can't hear
I
us.
was distracted.
Yeah, the bass
all
player
the
of-
guitars were distracting me.
The bass player of Nirvana is very politically active. He's for advocates for a group that wants to sort of make voting more fair and sort of make very
Or he at least he did when he was living.
Yeah.
yeah. No, the bass player is still alive.
Oh, the bass
Chris
player.
Novoselic,
Okay, I
think
was
is his name.
thinking of.
Yeah.
I've still
He
got
wants to make-
Kurt Cobain on the
he
brain.
wants to make very big reforms to the Electoral College.
Yes, and more power to him. But so the voter ID laws, basically, that's coming down from the national level because people have bought this idea that there's this massive voter fraud. Millions fraudulently voting in the election that cost Donald Trump the popular vote.
Which is
And-
nonsense.
Yes, it's absolute, complete, total bull hockey, and I'm being generous there. But so we had this voter ID law that my opponent takes credit for that now causes people to, have to go through an extra hoop to be able to vote. And part of the problem with that is that these kinds of things tend to disenfranchise certain segments of the population. And I saw those segments of the population when I canvass. And I have heard stories from people who have had to cast a provisional ballot because they did not have voter ID. And then their provisional ballot ended up not being counted, which is something that most people don't know. I would have thought, I'm casting a provisional ballot. It just means that, I don't get the real one, but this one will be counted. A lot of times that is not the case. And so I'm very suspicious, of having to cast a provisional ballot, even though they say that that's a remedy if you don't have a voter ID.
A lot of I'm sorry for interrupting. A lot of critics of voter ID laws will say that it is designed to prevent minority voters and impoverished voters in general.
The elderly,
Mm-hmm.
the disabled. Basically, you're talking about anybody that's likely to vote Democrat. Okay, well, let's just lay it out there. And so I believe that the right to vote is our basic, most fundamental right. We should be doing everything we can to encourage people to vote, not trying to discourage them from voting. And so I like my friend Susan Inman's idea. She is running for Secretary of State, and that office is the one that is responsible for the elections. And she would like to, well, first get elected and then start voting. I believe that it's online voting, but where more people can vote without going to the polls. I mean, we already do that with absentee ballot, for people who are sick or disabled in nursing homes or whatever, or going to be out of the state, those kinds of things. We already do that. So she's just talking about expanding that so that more people can vote. And that's what I think we need to be doing, is engaging more people in the process, not trying to prevent people from engaging in the process.
Yeah, it certainly feels like addressing an issue that isn't really there.
You are so perceptive.
And we talked a little bit on the ride over here. You mentioned that you have to have an ID to register in the first place.
I went and registered up at the office instead of taking one of the. I appreciate you giving me the voter registration forms, but I had to go to City Hall anyway, so I was like, I'll just do it up there. And they require photo ID when you register, so it stands to reason that if you register, that means you have an ID. So asking people to have like a voter ID seems counterintuitive and like a waste of. Maybe not a waste of resources. I don't know if it costs us money, but I would argue that it feels at the very minimum unnecessary. And if you're going to advocate for transparent elections, I think there have been more cases of like people whining about voter fraud than there have ever been actual voter fraud.
Absolutely.
So.
And I registered in 1970.
How is it possible if you're only 27 years old?
I know. Well, I time traveled back to 1975, and so it's been a while. And so when I originally registered, we didn't have to show ID. So people my age, older, before the voter ID laws, may not have had to show an ID. Yeah. Or, provide one when I don't even remember what was required when I did that. Sure. But to now require one, some people that have been doing things a certain way for maybe 50 years, and then they get to the polls and find out, oh, sorry, today, now the new thing is you've got to show photo ID. Some of those people may not drive anymore. They may not have a photo ID.
Sure. They're not getting carded at the bar.
Right.
Whatever.
I love it when they card me for buying wine.
Well, you're 27. You look
I know.
So young. How
could
they couldn't know.
I keep forgetting, but not that I buy that much wine, but anyway, but the problem with that voter ID initiative is that we would be making it part of the Constitution. That is, that's making it permanent. So if it's so wonderful as it is, okay, that the Supreme Court says, hey, it's good to go. We're going to use that. Then let's just use what's already there. We don't need to make it part of the Constitution.
Right.
In my humble opinion.
And I can't help but notice that this is a pattern in Arkansas. They typically do this right before voting, and this happened last time as well. And it's really just confusing.
Yes, it is.
Because if you're not on the internet all the time, how are you supposed to get that information?
Exactly. And don't you think that if people are confused, they might be less likely to even go vote?
Yeah.
Not knowing what it is they're going to have to show. And that's another part of it, is if they can do anything to discourage people from even showing up.
Sure.
Hey, that's all the better.
Yeah. growing up, voting in politics and registering seems like a giant web of a bureaucratic nightmare if you're a kid. So making it harder to vote. Now I can hear some people right now saying like I'm not a racially prejudiced person. I don't think it's a big deal to have require someone to have a voter ID.
Right. I have to use my driver's license to spend over $50 on my credit card.
Yeah.
Why is it such a big deal if I have to use it to vote?
And I say like, first of all, voting is a fundamental right of our democracy. So like, I would just urge people that making and it also I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I find that the people that make that argument also tend to believe absurd conspiracy theories like, well, Democrats want open borders because they want to bring in more, minority voters who will vote for them so they can win the election.
Yeah.
Which is,
And I was like, you don't get to keep losing the popular vote every general election and say that.
And I would just like to dispel that myth. You have to be a U.S. citizen to vote.
Yeah.
You can't ship people in from Mexico to inflate the vote.
Yeah. It's a long running, the cultural Marxist weird theory.
Yes. Let's
But,
talk. Let's get to marijuana. Or unless you have more.
No, let's do some of the actual ones that are on the
Oh,
ballot.
More ballot initiatives.
You save it. Oh, you're saving the marijuana for dessert?
Sure, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that after.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We don't have to do all of these, but
I actually don't.
there are a few I think we should touch on. Issue 5, for example, you've already talked about a living wage, or actually, I think you said a wage that allows you to have some dignity.
Yes.
So issue 5,
Which some might call a living wage.
Yes.
I think that they're mutually inclusive.
There you go.
But issue 5.
Will you tilt the mic down to your mouth? So that way you're not talking
Does this work?
below it.
So basically, issue 5, the initiative is minimum wage will incrementally increase to $11 an hour. This is overtime, and it's
I
pretty
believe,
straightforward.
I believe that it would hit the $11 mark in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm absolutely for that. I think that right there is enough reason for people to get to the polls
Right.
and vote for that. So while you're there, go ahead and vote for me. But
Shameless plug.
yes, we definitely need that. But I also would venture that we need earned income tax credit in this state for people that still, even at that, are having a tough time making it. And earned income tax credits, they kind of depend on the size of your family, the number of children you have, because, even if a family of 4, 2 parents or 2 income earners and 2 children, $11 an hour for 2 people is still not all that much money.
No. You're still quite close to the poverty line.
Exactly.
in the
So
poverty line.
so we
Sorry.
need to be, I think that we need a state earned income tax credit to also get people up to a living wage, based on the size of the family.
And it's worth thinking about with issue 5. The last time there was an initiative to raise the minimum wage, incredible bipartisan support. It was overwhelmingly popular.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to guess, I would say this one is also going to be pretty popular.
Yeah. When was that one? If just to not to derail everything, but when was that last one? Do you know?
I think it was. It wasn't that long ago. It was.
Yeah.
I want to say
A year,
2014, maybe.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, they raised it to. I think they've raised it to $8.50, so like by $1. But I'm not going to give anyone a big pat on the back for that. But
yeah, it's and one of the things that people say, well, that's higher than surrounding states. Yeah, it is, but I also don't know if you're aware of this, but I've heard some of my union friends talking about, especially in construction and jobs like that, some of the skilled jobs, where there are job sites near the Arkansas border, then they will bring in workers from other states that will take a lower wage, and then it's still cheating Arkansans out of a job.
Right.
And I mean, they just have all kinds of ways around taking care of people in Arkansas, so to speak. And I think we should just be putting the people of Arkansas first in everything.
All right. So this is an interesting issue because it affects you directly. This is going to be issue number 3. This is the initiative for state legislature term limits. It would limit 6 years for the House of Representatives and 8 years for the Senate. That would be placing a term limit on yourself. So let's get into that. That one's the most confusing of the issues, I think, because what are the term limits anyway? So what are your thoughts about that issue?
Okay, well, I wouldn't have any problem with term limits. Whether or not those particular term limits are appropriate, I don't know because I haven't looked at it to kind of see what would go on. But I'll just put a couple of thoughts out there. First, when you term limit, okay, you're going to have massive turnover all at the same time. And you may be turning out your favorite party and bringing in the whole other party, so you might think that that's a good idea, but you got to look at what's happened in other places where this has been done. And that's kind of what happened when we had the first term limits passed here back several years ago. People were term limited out, and now we have a majority Republican legislature. And I don't think that just have it. I think we need a mixture, of parties, lots of diversity in there because we have lots of diversity in the state. So for the legislature to be truly representative, it should be diverse. So I'm for that. I'm not sure that will get us to that. 6 years doesn't sound like a lot of time because I would imagine that you spend the first 2 years just learning the job.
Right.
And then you have 4 years to do a good job before you're out the door, and then they're bringing in newbies.
I would argue that there's a more fundamental argument to be made there. I think the higher up you go in political power, for lack of a better word, the more prescient term limits become because typically when people become senators or governors or presidents or Supreme Court, they've been in the political wheelhouse for a long time, so they know what they're sort of dealing with. Whether or not I think their motives are good is another conversation. But when we're talking about politics at this level and getting change done, you said that you could give power to the other party. I would argue that if the people elect majority Republican, well then they elected majority Republican, and whether we agree or disagree, they should have the opportunity to put forward some sort of an agenda. And I think when you limit with term limits in that way, ultimately nothing will. It may seem like a cop out, but not a lot of things will ever get done, and the political process could atrophy in a way that's not particularly.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there because, other things that I think about is if people are term limited, no matter how good of a job they're doing, and people would like for them to be able to continue, but they've term limited out, and then you don't get really good quality candidates running, then you're going to get
perhaps an amendment or an initiative that says, hey, we really like this guy and we'd like to be able to vote for him again, maybe on a more case-by-case basis. I can understand people wanting term limits for senators or congressmen because there are people who've been in the Senate for 1,000 years.
Yes.
And they need to leave.
Are you talking about the dinosaurs?
Yes.
But so I can see advantages and I can see disadvantages, and I just haven't really had a chance to weigh them out. As for me personally, I don't have any problem with the term limit, I mean, I wouldn't base it on whether or not I could stay in there. I'll just leave it that way because when it's my time to go, it's my time to go, and I mean that in all sorts of contexts.
You're 27. You have a
Yes.
long, fruitful life. I'm not dropping the joke. I'm keeping it. I'm not going to edit it out.
This one's it's a repeat. This is a repeat initiative, so it did get put on the ballot before, and this is about the casinos. This is issue number 4. The proposal is authorize 1 casino in each of the following counties: Crittenden, Garland, Pope, and Jefferson. from what I understand about that issue, those are sort of economically underperforming areas that are in the corners of the state where there's not only low traffic to them, but people are leaving. They're getting out of Dodge. So, what do you think about that initiative?
Well, first of all, I don't buy the economic reason for supporting casinos. I do not buy it. I was thinking about this with, is it Daryl Royal? Is that the coach that is doing the commercial that was, he was a football player here at University of Arkansas eons ago. And I don't know if that's who it is for sure, so don't quote me on that. But he's doing a commercial or an advertisement promoting that particular initiative. And he says, you know, in Oklahoma, we've been doing this for years, you know, that it's helped the state's economy. I just want to submit to you that I don't think I would be wanting us to follow Oklahoma's example in anything, because if
Take
that's
that,
been
Sooners.
yeah, if that's been an economic boon to their state, then why are they not funding their public education to where teachers, the schools have had to be shut down to 4 days a week. The textbooks are probably, you know, like a generation old. They are so seriously underfunded. So if it's been such a boon to Oklahoma, why aren't they doing better? You know, they and he says, you know, that the oil industry is doing great. Oh, I'm sure they are. But, you know, the ordinary people aren't. Right. And that's what tends to happen when we have those kinds of things. You can bet that if that passes, the rich are going to swoop in and get even richer off of the backs of the poor people that really cannot afford to be in those places, but they will be.
Yeah. I don't even feel like that's not even the best argument you could make for why you would want a casino. I mean, the better argument to make is be like, I have a more libertarian approach to people's personal issues, and if you want to gamble, more power to you, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, arguing that it's going to, like, you know, stimulate the economy or whatever. If that was true, Las Vegas would be like, you know, the land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
It's probably, I don't know much about Las Vegas's economy. I assume it's okay, but yeah, I don't think that it's, you know.
Well, you know, and he was saying that it keeps the money in the state because the people that want to gamble are going to go out of state anyway. This way they just won't need to. Crittenden is West Memphis, where they have the dog tracks. Right. Was it Garland for Hot Springs?
Yep, Garland County.
Okay,
Don't
so
we have Oaklawn and Hot Springs?
Yeah,
Oaklawn and Hot Springs, we already have gambling in both of those places. Jefferson is Pine Bluff. Man, I just think there's better ways to help Pine Bluff than give it, you know, putting in a casino.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not really in favor of that. I also know that for years they've been using the casino thing or legalized gambling of this is how we're going to get money for education, you know, and that might happen for the first year or two, and then it starts going into the general fund and it goes to everything else.
Yeah. All right. So that's a definitive no on that one. That's good though. I mean, I haven't really thought about them that much because it just seemed like why not? But now I've got some homework to do.
It certainly feels like they're not making the right argument is all that I'll say.
Yeah.
I don't have anything against casinos.
Yeah, that was my thing is I just didn't really care, but got some things to think about. The last one, which I think has to be, it's actually the first one, but it's definitely the most well-funded of the initiatives. I see billboards about it everywhere. This is issue 1. I've even seen my Facebook feed is covered with it. It's the
tort reform.
Tort reform. It limits attorneys' fees and damages. It caps the fees, limits punitive damages in civil suits. So basically, if you sue an organization, regardless of the magnitude of their mess up or the scale of the damages they incur, you cannot be rewarded over a certain amount in damages, and I believe that cap is that's
$500,000 for personal damages and $500,000 for punitive damage. And for
seems
anybody that thinks that that's a lot of money,
It's a popular pittance if your family got cancer.
And there's legal
exactly,
fees,
you know, and exactly, legal fees would probably come out of that. But even if they didn't, you know, so let's just say that some huge corporation knowingly was selling a toxic defoliant. We'll just, you know, like Agent Orange or something like that.
thing.
And they knew before they ever marketed it that the damage that it would do, but they did it anyway. And then people suffered, you know, horrible deaths or whatever, illnesses and then deaths. Then basically there's a limit on how much they would have to pay out, regardless of the bills and everything that those people would incur. And with medical costs what they are today, let me tell you, that money would not go very far. And also, it basically, in essence, puts a value on life.
Right.
And so if this were a child that is not earning a livelihood and something horrible was done to them, you know, like they were, you know, fumigated with whatever, and they suffered neurological damage for the rest of their life or whatever, then and they have to be cared for the rest of their life. If you think that $1 million is going to cover that, then you are sadly mistaken.
Maybe the
And
first year.
Yeah, and so mainly that is helping the corporate interests. And I will also tell you that some of the lobbyists that were in the halls of the Capitol promoting this were nursing home industries, the nursing home industry.
Yep.
And, you know, and that causes me great pause. You know, what is it that you guys are doing so bad that you want to limit your damages? You know, maybe you should just do things right
Yeah.
and not have to pay any damages.
It seems to me a way of, you know, padding one's, you know, if like, it seems like a way of padding one's fall, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think to people who might brush this off as like, oh, I don't know what tort reform is, and I don't know. Tort reform has to do with, you know, what you can sue a company for, essentially, for violating your rights in some, not your rights, but for violating your physical well-being. In
Yes,
some sort of
if
way,
you
or your environment.
A tort is like negligence, you know, where
You pollute a river,
right.
And you drink from the river, and you get sick.
right.
Yeah, that falls under tort reform, and it seems to me this is a way of giving them a sort of back door. I've always said, you know, like, to say nothing of the fact that we just cut our corporate tax rate significantly in the last year. This seems like a way of, if you give corporations a way out of doing the right thing, they will take it.
Exactly.
Is it because they're bad people? No, it's because that they're incentivized to make money. That's what a corporation does. And if a corporation pollutes a river, I'm gonna throw a hypothetical out here to maybe it'll help people understand. If a corporation pollutes a river and that pollutant washes downstream, and someone in certain communities use that for part of their drinking water, or they wash their clothes in it, or what have you, and then they are struck with a lawsuit, and the corporation is going to weigh the costs and or the pros and cons of paying out lawsuits to people as opposed to changing their practices.
Exactly.
You know, if it says like, well, if we have to pay the shipping cost and containment costs of taking all this, this waste and pollutant and building a building and repository for it, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars potentially.
Yeah,
Or we
it's
could
factored in as a cost of business.
Yes, or we could just pay them. Oh, let's get a lobbyist to advocate for a bill that would set the punitive damages at $500,000, and we'll just, if someone has the balls to come forward and sue us, we'll just give them $500,000.
Speaking of,
Saves you a lot of money for doing some pretty terrible stuff.
Speaking of having the balls to come forward and sue, that's another thing that this law, if this were put into law, would do. Is I mean, it could take us back to the British rule where if you lose in court, you pay all the costs. So if you're Joe Schmo,
this bill does that.
yes, it has that potential, and so it's going to have a chilling effect on people who have legitimate causes for suing, not doing that because they're afraid they might lose and end up having to pay the costs. Furthermore, the really big reason that this is a bad idea is because it is taking power away from the judiciary to
Decide what's best
to
for each case.
oversee itself, the rules of the courts and all of that stuff. The Arkansas Bar Association is against this, and a lot of people say, oh, it's because they're not going to make as much money. No, it is because basically you are placing authority in the hands of the legislature to oversee the judiciary, and that creates an imbalance in power. We need, the checks and balances of a healthy judiciary, legislature, and executive branch. We do not need one taking over powers and authorities of another. Yeah. And, we're seeing some of that kind of play out at the national level.
Absolutely.
And, we do not want or need that in Arkansas.
Of course, the Bar Association would be against it. It could potentially cut clientele. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be disincentivized for bringing a lawsuit because if you lose, you will pay all the fees, you might not go and get a lawyer.
Oh, right. And I also think it's.
I see you looking at the time.
No, I'm just looking. I'm just looking. No,
I'm having fun. Don't cut this short.
I'm not cutting it short.
You were.
No, I have a little bit of.
He's saving the marijuana for dessert.
Oh yeah, we have to get to that. We have to get some marijuana at some point.
And we have some fun stuff that we'll save for
the
end as well.
I don't like.
Will is trying to be a lawyer right now as
correct.
we speak. So
so you have vested interest in that particular.
Right. Well, as somebody who really wants to enter into a legal profession for the right reasons, I don't really enjoy seeing the stereotype, the archetype of the gritty lawyer. You have to pass a pretty rigorous ethics examination to become a lawyer.
Exactly. And that's why we don't need the legislature dictating ethics or anything else for the legal field.
Sure.
They need to be doing some ethics on themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you
Exactly.
very much. You need to remove, that log from your eye before you start trying to pick out that splinter in your brother's eye.
Yeah, and
legislature.
I wasn't trying to insinuate that lawyers are greedy and that's why they'd be opposed to this. I think it's because I'm sure a lot of lawyers do get into it for the right reasons. But if clients are going to be disincentivized from acting against a large corporation for fear that they could cripplingly bankrupt themselves, that will harm their profession and would harm them, their own ethical, moral center or what have you.
And I think this legislation, if it passes, to the extent that money does influence how a lawyer will perform his or her job, that really undermines the idea of having a zealous advocate in court. Mm-hmm. You have a right as a citizen and as a resident of Arkansas to a zealous advocate in court. And if that lawyer thinks, well, this is going to end up costing me money, if they're going to come back with this retaliation of trying to charge me and my client, why would I take the case in the first place?
Yeah, lawyers could have to charge higher prices to pad that difference.
Right, and it's a positive feedback loop, and it seems like a dangerous road to start down on,
to say the least. That's probably the biggest initiative.
It's the most well funded for sure.
And,
yes,
it is.
Vote no for Initiative 1. Yeah. We do not want that.
Do you want to get to some of the fun stuff?
I can hardly wait.
We live in a world where Scott Pruitt was the EPA guy.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
and it reeks of that. Yeah, it sounds like something he probably does sponsor it in some way. I wouldn't be surprised if he was behind it in some capacity.
There's definitely some dark money about it because because of the nature of campaign finance, we don't know where the money is coming from for all this advertisement. It's not coming from people who are grassroots advocates in Arkansas to put a cap
Exactly.
Of
on,
giant
you know,
corporations. It's a grassroots campaign of
It's
giant
from the
multinational
Koch brothers.
it's probably from, you know, major businesses who are here in Arkansas who are not looking for any kind of damage payout, you know.
It would be one thing if they were like, we're going to set the cap at 20 million. I would be like, okay, well, that's 20 million dollars. It's 20 times what the other one, or 40 times, because 500,000, wasn't it? Yeah.
Whatever.
I mean, yeah, and that's a hazard to workers, to people. Well, you know, like let's just say some forklift driver gets overzealous and runs over you at Walmart or something, you know, and then, well, sorry, you know, our punishment is limited. You know, I'm sorry that you had 12 kids depending on you for the next 18 years, and you know, hope you can make it on $500,000 here and $500,000 there.
Yeah. If the only punishment,
Sucker.
if the only punishment a child got for beating someone else up was like, go tell them you're sorry, and then like, you know, they weren't disciplined. That's sort of like what that is, because these
Exactly.
companies have billions of dollars. 500,000 is nothing.
Nothing.
And
Yeah, they
they'll-
would rather pay
yeah.
it than change their ways.
Yeah. All right. Fun stuff. Fun
Fun
time.
stuff. Okay, so I wasn't even going to talk about, because I kind of forgot, but let's go ahead and talk about the marijuana thing.
Yeah. He has some very interesting insight that might
So
shock and awe you, I hope.
Not shock and awe, but
Shocked and awed
Oh
me.
man, not much shocks me anymore.
So the last election, we saw some pretty crazy stuff happen with medical marijuana in the state, and we saw some pretty interesting handling of that legislation, especially the introduction of a competitive law that was placed on the ballot, and the original law initiative was taken off illegally after the fact. I had voted for it 2 days later. It was gone. It wasn't even there anymore. You could vote for it, but it wouldn't count.
Into your mic.
Sorry.
It's
Sorry, I'm talking into my mic now. But that was an initiative for medical marijuana in the state of Arkansas, which is it's just like the minimum wage initiative. It has broad bipartisan support. And you know, I was in a state and local politics class at the time, and we were really into that, and we were able to submit some ideas to the legislature for that. And I kind of want to. It's not anything you're running for right now, but I want to get your opinion on how that particular thing was handled, especially since it's the subject of, I'm pretty sure, an ongoing ACLU investigation, because they took it off the ballot after it had already been approved.
Yeah. You didn't even talk about like how like it was the Democrats that were the staunchest opponents of it.
The Arkansas board of it was the health professionals in the state that advocated against it as well.
Oh, my mistake.
But there were several really surprising opposition leaders in the state for that one. And after we get finished talking about the medical aspect, there's also really popular support in Arkansas for recreational. So I did want to talk a little bit about what are your thoughts about how the medical marijuana issue was handled in the state? Because I that's something that is going to come up one way or another.
Well, first of all, the people, once they make their will known, then that's what we should be following.
Right.
And I'm not real well versed on that, probably as well as you are. So feel free to chime in. But the dragging of the feet on instituting the medical marijuana, I mean, that was 2 years ago that passed, and we still don't have access to it. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so once the people have made their will known, then carry it out, okay? Don't drag your feet, and don't be trying to maneuver it so that even though you were totally opposed to it to begin with, I'm going to drag it down and try to figure out a way that I can get rich off of it, because that seems to be another thing that's been going on.
Right.
And, so that seems like a huge conflict of interest to me there. And so that's basically where I am on the medical marijuana. And it seems like I read something this past week. I believe it was I saw it posted by my friend Melissa Fultz, where some medical marijuana was going to end up costing like $32,500 for.
For like a pill form or something?
Yes.
For a prescription?
Yes, and so are the drug companies trying to get involved so that they can get rich off of this now? Is that what's going on? Because I really don't know.
So it's interesting because the original legislation and the language that was put on the ballot that they later took off, even though voting had already started. The original legislation allowed for you to grow some in your own house as long as you were registered to do it. And it made it a lot more accessible. I think the list of qualifying conditions was somewhere around 70 to 80 different conditions. The new and the profits, this is the really important part. Profits weren't centralized. So as long as you operated within the guidelines of the state, you were free to make a profit off of it at your own dispensary as long as you followed all the regulations.
You said that they literally
They
replaced your ballot initiative with their own watered down
and
version.
they lowered the requirement for signatures on that one dramatically. So I think it was like a fourth of the required signatures to really pass it through as quickly as they could. Really shady, and then the profits for that all went to exactly 8 people.
Okay.
Which I don't even know how that's legal, but it's a way of making it impossible to access it. And then of course you had the issue after it was passed because people still voted for it. Their tactic to confuse people with 2 ballots on it failed. After it was passed, you had efforts to undermine the language that they'd already whittled down. So it went down to, I think, a dozen qualifying conditions, and you could not own it. You had to buy it from a dispensary. Usually, I think in a pill form. I don't think you could smoke it. It was later added. So they added all these stipulations after the fact, which is, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, totally undermining the will. Yeah, it's totally undermining the will of the voter.
Sure.
And you have really strong support in Arkansas from a medical perspective because
Republicans like weed too.
Well, they like profits, and
And weed.
There's some it's sort of weird, but I mean my mom had a child who had severe seizures when she was a kid. That's like a miracle cure for seizures, and she died as a result of that. Had that been legal at the time, she might not have. And
Well, exactly. And, and that's what it was intended for, and that's why it needs to be made available as it was originally intended. This is what happens when people start trying to, get in on the action, and then it loses its original intent and purpose, and the people that really needed it aren't getting it. I remember talking with a constituent that her niece was like 2 years old, had the seizures. I mean, like thousands a day. And they ended up moving to Oregon where they could get medical marijuana.
Yeah.
And they're not from Oregon, they're from here. They would like to be here. They thought that they could be here because we have had a medical marijuana law passed, thought they would be able to get the same kind of care and treatment here, and they can't still. And I mean, it has created a quality of life for that child that child would not have otherwise.
Right.
So when people have this image of, people just wanting access to the marijuana to get high,
Right.
That's not what medical marijuana is about. I have personal friends who have debilitating conditions that medical marijuana can relieve. It also helps to avoid or fight the
Opioid,
opioid. That's hard to say.
It is a little difficult
It's
to
like
say.
the opioid addiction problem that we are facing in this state. So, if we could do something to head that off, we should be doing it, and especially when it's legal. I mean, hello, thank you very much. So,
Is recreational marijuana use something that you would support?
The older I get, the more likely.
Oh my gosh.
I'm almost 28 now, so
Oh my God. She ran with it.
She brought it back.
So, because basically what I see happening, and Cory Booker has kind of swayed me on this. You know, he's the
Which I think he did for somewhat disingenuous reasons, but I'll
probably so. But you know, when you look at a lot of the problems that we have, and mass incarceration of people for minor drug offenses, and then we keep them locked up for inordinate amounts of time. And then white collar criminals, not only do they get off scot-free, but they
get tort reform.
They get promoted, you know, to the national level. And sorry, I digress. But you know, I'm thinking that there are some advantages to taking a look into that and seriously considering that, because it could probably kill several birds with one stone, and I don't mean that literally.
You mentioned that like it helps alleviate the opioid crisis. In I believe it was in Portugal or Spain when they legalized recreational marijuana, the opioid crisis fell by like over 50%.
Well, it's a well documented phenomenon of harm reduction. I mean, it really does work.
Well, you know, and here's the thing. Everybody wants to base this on a moral basis.
Yes,
you know. And I am
Which I'm fine with.
I am a science teacher, okay? You know, I believe in looking at the data, and you know, if this accomplished the goals that we need to accomplish, then that's the route we should go. You know, and you know, exactly, you were saying moral issue, you're fine with that, because not everybody
I'm fine with framing things in the correct way they probably should be framed. There are people right now serving life sentences. There was a guy in California, this is before it was passed. It was his third offense. And he had other stuff on his record before, but it was his third offense. He was caught with he had marijuana system. He was caught with a little bit on him. Life in prison.
You know, the
rest of his life,
three strikes and you're out kind of. Well, and exactly. And I mean, when oh my gosh, this is such a huge social issue, and it is de facto racial discrimination.
Sure.
You know, that that's how they just sweep so many of our young black men up, and they end up imprisoning them. And then, of course, you know, supposedly, is that a felony? I don't know.
So I think what you're talking about is
some places have decriminalized it, and they've made it sort of like getting a traffic ticket.
Okay.
Which you know, I'm happy with that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think she's referring to the study, the crime statistics about who uses marijuana. And between black people and white people, it's the same rate, more or less. It's almost the same, but the incarceration rate for drug offenses is overwhelmingly
more than
black
double.
people.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and you know, so if that can help bring down our prison population, which that's another issue of mine.
And also, people should consider, one is marijuana is called weed because it literally grows almost everywhere. It's a weed, and if you want to take power away from violent drug cartels, the best thing that you could do is let people will not go and buy from some black market, you know, drug dealer, which, you know, no one buys from a black markety, you know, guy in a trench coat in an alley anymore. They buy from their white friend with dreadlocks at the local Guitar Center or whatever. But if you can take power, you'll cripple cartels overnight. And I've heard, you know, law enforcement people, you know, I have a friend of mine in Memphis who's, you know, he's a cop, and he supports legalization. And he goes, but you have to be careful of, you know, very bad cartel driven shell companies getting into the game of, oh, now we're going to sell legal weed. But I think that the advantages for it far outweigh the potential downsides. I mean, you cannot overdose on marijuana, so you can't make the argument it's dangerous for you, as Jeff Sessions would like to make.
Yeah, there's lots of weird things. The craziest thing about that to me is this is the party of small government who wishes to maximize government.
If
in
Republicans
a very specific
if they can
way.
profit from it,
Right.
If Republicans were smart, they would co-opt this issue. It could win them an election.
They're starting to.
Yeah.
You see that happening at the national level.
Sure.
But
okay, don't
Don't give them
encourage them.
ideas.
Don't encourage them to do anything
I don't-
that
I
might
capitalize.
actually be smart. Not until after I get elected.
I will encourage them, because if it can get some of these people out of jail, and if it does get passed, I think Donald Trump should pardon everyone who is in jail
Exactly.
for marijuana as well.
Exactly.
If he had,
I
you know.
think that should be part of the
And
legislation.
give them back their voting rights.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
All right, so why don't we wrap up with the real fun stuff?
The real fun stuff.
Okay.
Oh my gosh! You mean it's not been fun yet?
We're talking about some Brett Kavanaugh and some Twitter stuff.
Just a little bit of social media, because
Okay.
we both checked out both of y'all's, you and Mark Lowry's social media. I think we got some pretty interesting insights about your opponent based off of the people he retweets. And you notice he doesn't really say a lot of stuff. You notice he retweets
very,
a lot.
very
Well,
confident in.
I
portraying
don't
other
have a
people's
clue
ideas.
what he posts because I was blocked a long time ago.
Oh, really?
I mean, like probably February.
The party of free speech, ladies
Free
and gentlemen.
speech, my free speech. Okay. Well, I'll keep you up to date.
Thank you.
So, let's identify who this guy is. This is Mark Lowry. He's running for his 4th term, so he's an incumbent for the same seat, District 39.
Used to work for Mike Huckabee.
Yeah, he's good old boy kind of system. Very strong
Tea
conservative.
Party Republican.
A little bit of a reactionary, if we're going to be honest. Does seem to long for a golden age of American identity in politics.
The 1920s.
Yeah, I wouldn't define him as necessarily conservative for that reason, just as a matter of definitions. But he does have a strongly conservative voting record. He is, of course, pro ID for voting, pro-abortion ban. Especially, he did pro-abortion after 20 weeks. But he's also one of the heartbeat proponents. Has a very unusual stance that the death of any unborn child, I think we talked about this earlier, should be a felony.
He proposed a bill that said that if under to be fair to him, under certain circumstances, if a child is killed, like a pregnant mom is negligent in some way and gets her child killed, that she should be charged with a felony.
And then there's a whole bunch of stuff we have to work with here. There was some campaign finance problems with his.
Which felt pretty. I'll say, for me personally, they felt somewhat minor.
They were
didn't-
negligent. I don't know if they were necessarily insidious or anything like
Sure.
that,
But they're repetitive.
they are
Sure.
repetitive.
That's true.
A person should learn from their mistakes and not keep making them. That's all I'm going to
Right.
say about that.
All right, so that's noted. I think one of the last tweet I think he actually tweeted, there was it was a photo of you and him together on I think KATV.
Capitol View.
Yes, I watched that.
Yeah, and his tweet said, "There is a clear contrast for the choices for District 39 representation," something I think you would very much agree with. So rather than just tell people how bad this guy is or how good he is,
Yeah, and he is more than welcome on this podcast.
Sure,
I'd
if
love
he's
to talk
listening.
to him and love to interview him as well.
I want you to elaborate on that tweet. There's a clear contrast for choices. What sets you and he apart?
Well,
Aside from your obvious age differences.
and
out.
IQ differences.
I'll be fair. I have some better ones here.
Yeah, you got some.
Okay, well, for one thing, as I said at the outset, I plan to represent the people in this district and the people of this state. I want to move this state forward. I want to lift people out of poverty, fight the generational poverty. That's going to be a long-term process. It's I have different priorities on where money should be spent. As I said, I think that we should be investing in our children and our community, and so that we can better prepare our children for the jobs of the future. And that's probably the biggest thing. I will put people before politics, and like I said, I don't get big money donors. I don't get money from the Waltons. won't ask for money from the
Does
Waltons.
he get money from the Waltons? I didn't know that.
That's one of his largest donors.
Wow.
Okay.
Did not
Noted.
know that.
He gets a lot of out-of-state money too. I don't. Okay, I'm not beholden to out-of-state
You
interests.
told me that you were sponsored
am
by one of the teachers' unions here as well.
AEA, which I'm actually a member of. I've been a member of the Arkansas Education Association my entire career, and I believe in workers' rights. You know,
I've never met a politician who said I'm against workers' rights, but that's fine.
I have.
What?
have you noticed that that's kind of a repetitive theme of his?
He's contrarian.
I'm not contrarian. I love the little things that, you know, some people like to say. It reminds me of that Will Ferrell movie, The Campaign, where he's like, wherever he goes, the people become the backbone of the country. Filipino steel workers are the backbone of this country. You
don't know what you're talking about.
Razorback hunting, you know, yokels in the woods are the back. He caters his message towards whatever crowd. I'm not
Whatever.
saying that you're doing that, but it reminds me of that. A little.
But so also I since I am a woman, okay, since you can't see me and you may not know that, I'll just state that. That I am a woman. I don't think that anybody can represent women better than another woman. And I think that some of the policies and things that my opponent promotes are anti-women. I'll just be very blunt.
Sure.
And so that's a major difference. I am a proponent of public schools and shoring them up, not tearing them down. What else? I'm curious as to what he said were the stark contrasts.
I would be interested to hear his take on medical marijuana and marijuana in general.
I think the biggest one for you. This is something he retweeted from some guy, from at the handle David A. Ray, and I've seen it. I've seen this come up a lot, directed at you from him. Is big spender, as in you throw money at the problem instead of dealing with it, or that you think there's a problem in the first place, really is what it sounds like.
Oh, that's funny. I don't recall throwing money at anything. I don't think paying people what they're worth is throwing money at a problem.
She also advocated, I'd like to point out, she advocated for a tax cut while she was sitting here in front of us, the earned income tax cut.
Well, and
I mean, it's not a
Okay,
tax cut,
so
but it's a tax.
speaking of tax
advantage.
cuts, I don't know where he stands on that particular proposed tax cut of over 180 million for the wealthiest 10% of Arkansans for this next legislative session. I would imagine that he's supporting it, but I am actually against that. I think that money needs to be going for things that instead of cutting costs. He's a cutter, and I'm an anti-cutter. You know, I mean, if that money is needed, and we the taxpayers are paying to have our needs met.
That's what taxes are.
You know, I mean, I see taxes as a means to an end. Some people at the upper levels of the income ladder seem to think that it is the end. They want to keep them. They don't want to pay them. That's the whole purpose. And, you know, and as long as we have issues that are not resolved in Arkansas, and the high poverty clearly shows that we have unresolved issues, then we don't need to be giving more tax cuts. We need to be spending the money that's already coming in instead of, you know, just saying, whoops, you guys don't need to send it anymore. You go ahead and keep it for yourselves because you might need it. You know, I mean, that's ludicrous.
Yeah, and I think I think we heard that earlier in the interview. You sort of summed that up, that this tax money is going to these charter schools who are not, you know, they're not educating the kids at the same degree or the same.
Well,
material.
and you know, I want to clarify that because we have a charter school here in Maumelle.
Yeah. It gets bigger every year, and people seem to
Academics
like it.
Plus, you know, and I'm sure that it is a fine school, but it's still the truth is that it is draining from the public schools, and I just really I don't think that the people know that, you know. I mean, I'm not saying that it's mean, evil, and vicious. I'm just saying that can this community really support two school systems? Can it really support a public school to the standards that are required of them and an alternative, you know, because people don't want to send their kids to the public schools for whatever reason. Can we honestly support that? I don't believe that we can. And also, you know, when the students' rights are waived, for example, special needs students. A lot of the special needs students that are moved out of public schools and into this Succeed Scholarship, they will actually pay their tuition for a private school or for a charter school. The parents have to sign away their children's rights that are guaranteed at the public school. But they do not have to follow those same federal guidelines and regulations at the private and charter schools. And there's no way of telling whether or not those kids' needs are actually being met because there's no transparency.
Sure. Maumelle has always been relatively successful with their schools. Ever since they got the high school, everything seems to be going okay. Also, but they also shut down Oak Grove, and they kind of moved a segment of the population into that school. I have another tweet. I have a tweet from the man himself.
You can do all fun stuff if you want to. You can do tweets.
Yes.
If you want to read.
This ties in with what I wanted to talk about, sort of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. This is from Mark Lowry himself. This is not a retweet. Okay, the shouting down in Judge Kavanaugh's Supreme Court hearing is nothing short of demonic. Unfortunately, this is what has become of politics in America. Your thoughts?
Okay.
Well, I agree with him that the shouting, no, I wouldn't even say demonic. I mean, that's just hyperbole, you know. I mean, anytime you disagree with something the other person says doesn't automatically mean that they're demonic. You know, that's ludicrous.
Sure.
I will say this again as a woman, and I will even say this as a woman, I don't know of any of my friends that have not been sexually assaulted at some point in their life. And so for old white men in the Senate to basically call Dr. Ford, Brett Kavanaugh's accuser, a liar, because that's basically what they did when
To be fair, there were some old white men on the Democratic side that were Dick Durbin and Pat Leahy.
But they were older and whiter on the other side.
I don't know. Have you ever seen Pat Leahy? He's pretty old. He's pretty white.
But anyway.
I have another one here. I wonder why Democrats have put more effort into Brett Kavanaugh's faceless, vague 35-year-old allegation than Keith Ellison's documented history of domestic violence. I would point out that Keith Ellison is not running for a justiceship on the Supreme Court.
Exactly, a lifelong appointment. That and more.
And also, plenty of them have been very critical.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing about Kavanaugh that I consider just disqualifying was the way that when he was speaking was so rude and disrespectful to the senators that questioned him, in particular Klobuchar and Feinstein, and you know, coming back at them. That is so rude and disrespectful, and it shows that he does not have judicial temperament to me. And his opening remarks were so partisan. I don't think there's any possibility that he can be objective, and that's what we need.
Yeah,
you know,
I've sort of, because I do this all the time, and I think it drives maybe Robin and a few other people crazy. I'm a devil's advocate for Republicans a lot of the time.
I am too. I've devil's advocated at this podcast.
You're a little more left than me somehow. But I mean, it's that is the one thing that you have. There's no room for a question. I mean, you can see it happen. You don't have to say, well, I don't think he had judicial temper. No, he didn't.
Exactly.
He didn't have it, and he also lied.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot. You know, that's the sad thing is we've gotten so used to the lying.
Yeah. Even the
Is
quality.
that
of
I
the-
didn't even think about that because we are being bombarded daily with lie after lie after lie.
The quality of the lies
listening
is
to
even-
I was
is
listening to
even
a podcast with Sam Harris just
I
today, and he
noticed it.
said even Donald, the biggest thing that this whole the whole Trump phenomenon has done is it's lowered the quality of our lives. And I don't disagree with that. I to be a little controversial, I said that the assault allegations against Kavanaugh seem to me to be the least credible reasons why he shouldn't be a Supreme Court justice. He is argued for the dissent in Roe v. Wade, whilst simultaneously trying to straddle a fence, saying it's the law of the land, I won't overturn it. While he argued that a president should be allowed to pardon himself.
There you go. That's the big thing to me because and I agree with you wholeheartedly. We should have never even gotten to the accusations by Dr. Ford. He should have never been considered based on other things. He had already lied to Congress. You know,
He had stolen files from when he was working under the Bush administration. They gave files from the Democratic something or other and made their way to him, and he didn't really seem to care that much about it. Like you spying on your opponents, there is a word for that in the vernacular, not in the vernacular. It's the actual legal word, but yeah. And I was like, I listened to the Majority Report with Sam Cedar, and he made a fantastic point of this whole process the political process of like the judiciary has become a joke in the last year and a half.
It
Exactly.
ruins all legitimacy because the separation.
Every time a Supreme Court justice comes up and it's not named Merrick Garland, I'm just like, you're invisible to me in a way.
yeah.
yeah.
Because and part of this goes to the Democrats. And this gets to the second half of the fun half that I wanted to talk to you about is, the Democrats played softball with Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
They kept the Republicans kept that Supreme Court seat open for a year and 4.5 months. And they did it under this silly strategy that well, if they filibustered for a year and 4 months, we can do that too. And then Mitch McConnell got rid of the filibuster.
Pretty sneaky.
It's not. I mean, there's another word that I'd use for that, but I would chastise them for thinking that you can keep if Trump wins, you can somehow keep the Supreme Court seat open as well. That is naive thinking at best. To think that you can, first of all, playing Mitch McConnell at his own game is you cannot out slime a salamander like Mitch McConnell, and I think Democrats deserve an appropriate tongue lashing for playing that game as foolishly as they did and not fighting as vociferously. And especially Joe Manchin, who's the only Democrat who voted for Brett Kavanaugh in the Senate. Got to get rid of that guy. That guy votes with Republicans more than he does Democrats. Which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that if you're a Republican and that's what you believe, but yeah. And this brings the question that I wanted to bring into that was, what do you think of the Democratic strategy moving forward? Are you hopeful? Are you worried? Your general thoughts on their political strategy in general, and then we'll wrap it up.
Considering that I'm not even sure what their political strategy is,
Fair enough. Yeah.
I would have to say I don't know.
Yeah, well, there seems to be a nice wave of progressive candidates winning.
I'm hopeful based on that because and I would be much more hopeful if I would see some enthusiasm from the younger crowd. And I'll just the reason that I say
the three
that,
of us, because we're all the same age.
Yeah, that's right. We are the same age.
Cut that out. Oh my gosh.
But in my canvassing, and I don't want to give too much away because, as my opponent said when we were both standing in front of the same poll on primary election day, he said, I hear you're running a stealth campaign. And I thought,
stealth campaign?
Yeah, because I guess that means I don't know what the hell you're doing. And my thought was, and I'm going to keep it that way. So Anyway,
It's just a weird thing to say.
so I don't want to reveal my strategy, you know, because that would jinx it. But I will just say that for the primary, the group that I had to reach was only Democrats because that's what votes in the Democratic primary. And so I targeted people that have a good voting record. There were almost no young people in my target list, almost none.
Yeah.
It was predominantly elderly, and I'm not talking about 30. I'm talking about 80 and up.
Yeah.
And minority. And so, you know, we need to make sure that everybody that is eligible to vote gets out and votes.
Democrats are notorious slackers.
Exactly. You know, in the 2016 election, 57% of the registered voters stayed home. Look what we got because of it. So if that's not enough to drive you to the polls, then our country is doomed. I mean, it is doomed.
Right.
You know, so people will say, "What can I do? What can I do?" You know, well, you can always donate. You can always volunteer. If you volunteer, please show up. But the most important thing of all that absolutely everybody can do is vote. Just vote.
Sure.
You know?
What would you say to the younger people, and I'm sure plenty of older people, who say that it's not inaccurate to say that like the Democrats and this is a little more at the national level, I understand, but who say like, I don't vote because maybe they might have certain liberal policies, but the Democrats in Congress and in Senate, and I'm sure plenty at the local level, they vote. Nancy Pelosi votes with Trump on 73% of the issues. What do you say to those people who say, I don't see enough difference between the Democrats and the Republicans to really get me out of my bed in the morning?
Well, I say you're just not looking very hard. The Democratic Party in particular, I don't know about the Republican Party because I'm not a Republican, but the Democratic Party is very diverse. And so, since I am a science teacher, and in nature, diversity is a good thing. In politics, I also believe diversity is a good thing. One of the reasons why our politics have become so divided is because it seems like both sides have moved to opposite ends of the spectrum and they've made a stand. But we have the vast majority of people somewhere here in the middle. They agree with one side on some things and with the other side on other things. And their considerations and concerns are being completely left out of the mix because it's like whichever party, Republican or Democrat, it is the extremes of those two parties that are the tails wagging the dog. And the rest of us are getting left behind. The kitchen table issues are the things that most voters are concerned about. And I share their frustration with I don't feel represented by either party when the extremes are the tail that wag the dog. So what we need to do is we need to get in there and represent people like me, that I'm an ordinary person. I probably represent the views of a great majority of people, Republican or Democrat. However, I get doors shut in my face when I say I'm a Democrat by some people. They don't want to hear another word I have to say.
I guess to bring it back to the question then, if...
Oh, there was a question?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
No, I guess to be a little more specific is there are a lot of people who are very frustrated with the Democratic Party because it seems like they bill themselves as Republican light. I'm Republican, but I'm less crazy. And I would argue, and this is just my opinion, that is not a very good winning strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Because you do not distinguish yourselves from your opponent. Barack Obama, lost the Senate, lost the House when he had a supermajority when he first became president in 2008, and lost governorships, Senate seats, state representative seats,
1,000 seats,
over 1,000 seats, and that's not an exaggeration. And it's I would argue that billing yourself as Republican light is not always the best strategy, which doesn't mean you should never work with Republicans. It doesn't mean that, like, there are plenty of things where I do have common cause
Right.
with plenty of Republicans.
Yeah.
But what do you say to the people who say that the Democratic Party being Republican light isn't working?
I would agree with them. I mean, and I think we've seen that. I personally have seen that in more. The progressives are becoming more vocal. So I don't know if there's more of them or if they're just becoming more vocal.
Probably a little bit of
But
both.
and I think that's a very good thing. And that we need that in the Democratic Party. Yeah, I mean, what's the point of having Republican light? I mean,
Right.
yeah.
And you're seeing these candidates that are winning surprise elections. They're not Republican light. They're coming from a position of strength on the left, which is
And,
Working class warriors, as I call them.
And here's the deal. Okay, so this is my first foray into politics, as I've said, and oh my gosh, has it been a huge lesson? And the lesson is, you can't please anybody.
right.
Because I mean, honestly, you're for these people you're too progressive. For these people you're not progressive enough. All I'm going to say is I am what I am. I have my views, but I'm open-minded. I will listen to the stakeholders. Like, for example, last week I was speaking to the Maumelle firefighters. And I mean, we're really not much alike in very many ways, and
My
we're,
stepdad was a volunteer firefighter.
Yeah.
I mean, we're union members, but still the issues that matter most to them are the issues that matter most to me. And then they have some of their own special issues. For example, workers' comp and their not their retirement system and things like that are very specific to them. And as I told them, I'm not the expert on what you do. If I ever am confronted with an issue that affects you, I'm going to come and talk to you, and see what you think, because I know that the people that can come up with the best ideas that will work are the people in those situations. And so I don't have to be an expert on everything. I don't have to think like everybody else thinks, because I'm going to check with them, before I vote on legislation that affects them.
Sure. Yeah. As you said about, you can't please everybody. Winston Churchill said, if you have enemies, good. It means at some point in your life you stood up for something. I'm pretty sure I misquoted that. Monica Ball, running for State Representative of District 39, Maumelle, Arkansas. It's been wonderful having you on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And you can follow Monica at Monica Ball 2018 on Twitter. Follow her.
Yeah, we'll try to have a name for this thing next time as well, by the way.
And thanks so much for tuning in.